Okay, so I'm back and I want to talk to you about manual shooting mode a little bit, and then also about how to focus with the camera, at least the basic focus controls. There's actually ways of setting it to do a little bit more. So let's start with manual. So again, we've already discussed P, S, and A. P stands for programmable, S stands for shutter priority, A stands for aperture priority. So shutter priority basically means that you're setting the shutter and the camera sets the aperture for you. Aperture priority means you set the aperture and the camera sets the shutter for you. And M stands for manual, which means the camera does nothing. You do everything manually. And it sounds like I'm being serenaded here. I don't know if you can hear that. But all right, so let's take a look at this and in manual mode here. And currently I have my shutter set to 30 and my aperture set to f18. And this is kind of nice. Let's say, for example, you're outside, it's nighttime, and you want to take a picture, and your camera's like, it's way too dark, and it freaks out. It just doesn't know how to manipulate those settings. This is where you want to set it to manual, because you're basically going into what's called reciprocity failure, where the camera can't compute an aperture and shutter relationship for you. Also, if you're a more experienced photographer, you just know just what are better settings to use, and you play around with them, and that just comes with time and experience. So go back to info. So if I change this dial, you'll notice my aperture does not change now. If I want my aperture to change, here's how you do this. You press the exposure compensation dial button right there, and while you're holding that button down, you can choose the dial, and you see how that can change. So you can change the shutter and aperture, but when you change one, the other one does not change. This is my favorite shooting mode to use when I want to get experimental and when I really know what I want to do and I don't trust the camera to tell me. Okay, for more experienced photographers. Now, moving right along, the lens. All right, before you do anything, hopefully you haven't started messing with the lens yet, but friendly reminder, this setting of the lens, this is automatic, this is manual, and that's referring to focus. So this is my focusing dial right here, and this is my dial to change the lens zoom length. So if I have it set to manual, and do that first, because if you have it set to A, you try to do this, you'll break the lens. You can manually focus through the camera. You set it to auto, and I'm going to give you the short version. There's actually a way to determine when you look at the camera, like for example, is it focusing on what's in the middle? Is it focusing on just an average of what's there? Is it focusing on something off to the left? You can actually change the setting on the camera. I will show you how to do that later, but for now, let's just go over the basics. So if I set it on automatic focus and I turn my camera on, and it's on, and I don't know if you can see this, but I have my hand out. Let's see if I can do it the long way here. My hand out in front of the camera, and if I press this down below, you see how the lens is actually turning. And depending on the length, oh, and see, this is crazy because I just realized I have my my shutter speed set to like some ridiculously long time. All right, so let me do this again. Put this back to something slower. Okay, so again, if I hold an object out, it's going to focus again on that object, and you see how that dial changes on its own. But it has its limitations, because what if your subject matter is off to the side, right? But you're focusing with autofocus. It's going to focus on whatever's here. So your subject, which is off to the side, will be out of focus. Again, there's ways of changing that, and I will walk you guys through that later. That's for a different video. But if you're in a situation like that, for now, what I recommend is you just switch it to manual focus and then manually focus your camera. Also, I want to just mention, should have said this before, the diopter. Oops.